This is Dale Maharaj. This is the second to last show before we jump forward to 1995 and finish this video blog series. We're going to end it with Bruce Springsteen and how he came to be inspired by our first book, which has been chronicled here in this video series, mostly focusing on 1983. In 1984, as our first book was in production, we were involved with a whole bunch of crazy stuff going on in our lives, both personal and professional. Amid this, I had to carve out time to deal with copy editing and other things. Computers by 1984 were common in newspapers, big mainframes, but book publishing was still very much old school. Going back to our day jobs, Michael and I did a story for the newspaper about some religious people in town who were harboring political refugees who had fled the civil war in El Salvador. We saw a bigger story. So we decided to fly one way to El Salvador and follow the Underground Railroad as church members smuggled refugees at risk of being killed by death squads. There was the government-issued press card, but if you showed this to the various factions fighting the government, it could get you killed. You always wanted to show them the other press card, the one from the Overseas Press Association. SPCA, the acronym was no accident. Maybe we were animals. We went to El Playún, where the death squads dumped bodies. All the skulls here were shattered by bullet holes. And buzzards waited. Then we went to the rebel-held town called Suchitoto. In places, the road was mined. The anti-government forces had cut trenches through the asphalt. On one side, you could drive, and the other was buried landmines. I didn't take pictures in the places where the road was cut. My heart was in my throat. I wasn't thinking about pictures in those moments. Leo, our fixer, he told us he knew which side to drive on. But once we were going over the first one, he told us the previous week he'd had the back end blown off of a vehicle. The road had these rocks all over the place. We had to go around. About 3 months earlier, John Hoagland, a photographer who Michael knew, was killed in Suchitoto. While we were in Suchitoto, there was a firefight nearby. It was a spooky place. We covered refugee camps, traveled all over. Then we went north through Guatemala with refugees and the Underground Railroad. Curiously, the most dangerous part of the journey was in Mexico. This is Jim Corbett, one of the founders of the Underground Railroad. He was a Quaker who was scouting for a new route around the Huitla roadblock in Mexico. 6 Salvadorans had been killed there recently. There was a death threat against Jim, and we traveled surreptitiously. There's no way I can go into everything here. Everything about this project was hairy. Lots of bad things happened. A girl we met in El Salvador was probably killed as she tried to come north, or she'd ended up in a prostitution slave camp. For years I had nightmares about this project, as well as the Hobo Project. We went on a few smuggling runs with church members who were doing runs north towards the border with refugees. This is Barbara Hebercrape and Michael in a safe house in Mexico. We went on back roads, dodging roadblocks. Then came a run from Mexico City to the American border with a high-risk family. And something happened where that family, it ended up, their lives were in our hands. We had no choice. It was either abandon them or smuggle them. So we became the smugglers. They had a toddler named Beatriz. That was a made-up name. So I drove into the Sierra Madre where there were no roads to get around a roadblock. We got the family to the border, amazingly. Then 2 decades later, I again met Beatriz, whose real name is Lily. It started when I got an email with this in the subject header. You may not remember me, but I have a slight hunch that you will, the email began. In 1984, you and a photographer, Michael Williamson, helped me and my family escape El Salvador. Lily and I met, we had coffee, and then I wrote this lives column for the Sunday New York Times Magazine. This lead describes our lives in that period that we were doing Journey to Nowhere. It was an insane time. And it reads in part, if I showed up at your door in those days, your life had been marked by epic tragedy. I closely witnessed 1,000 shattered lives, which is to say, I retained 1,000 demons from that decade. Meeting Lil, that killed one of those demons. It was a really, really good thing to meet up with her and kind of, connect with that past in a good way. And then later, Michael met Lil, and these photos are taken by Richard D. Schmidt. If you want to read the article, in Google, type my last name in, New York Times, and El Salvador. The first thing that'll come up is that story. So, going back in time, without pausing, we hit the road for 2 months that fall to cover real people stories for the election that year in a project called Pulse of America. We took roads less traveled. In Iowa, we lived on a farm for a few days with Mr. Monternock and his family. They were great folks. Ronald Reagan was telling us that it was morning in America. That was one story. We knew better, and we'd shown that in our book that was about to come out in a few months. We got into a lot of lives and situations in Detroit, Boston, Appalachia. I even rode a camel. We stopped at that art installation in West Texas, Cadillac Ranch, and we were there to document the last piece of famous Route 66 when it closed, bypassed by the interstate. And the year went on. Michael covered the Olympics. And then in December, Assistant City Editor Michael Flanagan, who's wearing red, told us to go to Santa Barbara where there'd been a murder and police and vigilantes were fighting the homeless. In Santa Barbara, the homeless were called the Tree People, after this Morton Bay fig tree where they camped. There were hundreds of them. When we got to Santa Barbara, we took our sleeping bags and backpacks and went and camped with the Tree People. And then one night the police swept in. It's here that we met Crazy Red, who gave us the title for the new book, Someplace Like America. As we were running from the police that night, I sputtered, "How can they do this?" I was incredulous. And Crazy Red, who's a Vietnam War veteran, looked at me as if I were crazy, and he said, "Where do you think you are? Someplace like America." And those words stuck with me. That December, we got the film of the cover, and then the actual cover itself. This is the Doubleday catalog. But man, we were tired. Even though the publicist is telling us that she's doing all sorts of stuff, she really wasn't doing very much. We were going to have to promote the book on our own. 1985 promised to be grueling. On the last day of 1984, we got our first review. In the next show, the last before we jump forward to Bruce Springsteen, I'm going to tell you about what happened when the book came out.